Hey there, this is Perch. So I'm in a more somber mood today, and I think I've been trying to understand why. Um, I think part of what I believe in comics is that there are hundreds of comics. If you go back into back issues, there are hundreds of thousands of comics, maybe even millions of comics out there. There's something for every personality, every like, every desire. There's something for everyone in there. There's definitely more of some than others, of course, but there's a little bit of everything, and so I've always taken a lot of happiness and confidence and joy in that fact, the fact that there is there's a world of comics out there, and the bar to actually making your own comics is not that high. There's It's a huge bar, of course, to make the comic and get it purchased or get it printed by Marvel and become one of those sorts. Absolutely, there's a very high bar to become a key figure at a big publisher. But if you have an idea, if you have a dream, if you have a concept, and you just want to get it out, the bar is very, very low to get your idea out into the world. And comics were a better way to go about having that creative vision come to life than movies and TV, both because of the cost and the barrier to get there is much higher. That's falling with YouTube, and we're seeing that go on right now with people being able to make their own videos and being able to distribute them, and there being a marketplace for that kind of content. And it scares a lot of people, by the way, who have been in this business for a long time and for quote unquote, as I talked about before, paid their dues and they got their coveted position in this industry that used to have a pretty large gate, and now there's a vehicle for people to do their own thing, and it's aggravating. I'm sure personally, it's very, very aggravating to work your life, work 20, 30 years to get to a position and have some YouTuber out there making more money than you. That's where a lot of the anger comes from people within the industry. It's jealousy, but it's unfair to just call it plain jealousy. It's also I mean, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around, to put so much of your life and so much of your effort down the track, and then somebody comes around, disrupts it, and suddenly there's an easier road. The road you learned is less important than it used to be. This is the way a lot of people used to, this is how printing was. There would be people who really understood the ins and outs of how to print and paper stock and getting stuff lined up and sending the EPS to the printer and just all these heavy details about printing a book or a comic or anything. And then digital tools came along. Suddenly it was much easier to send stuff to a printer. You didn't have to lay it out, with lithe and with metal rulers and with it. You didn't have that. Those old skills were not needed. And for a while, you could kind of hang on to say, well, the old rules, even though we can do new technology and new things, um, the fundamentals of learning kind of proper page layout and page design and these other things are still super valuable. And that was true for a while, but it's becoming less true. It's definitely less true now. Being able to use a red lithe and cut with an X-Acto blade and get, a print ready, that's not a skill that is relevant now. And that's tough. It's tough when you learn it and it goes away. But progress is important, and comics and art and design and all of these different techniques rely on progress to stay alive. If nothing had changed 50 years ago in how comics were made, we wouldn't see as many comics made, we wouldn't see as many ideas, and it would be that technology frozen in ice is not a good thing. We need new ideas, we need new blood coming in, but it's not an all positive process. And I think that the reason I'm kind of this thoughtful, I don't want to say morose, I don't know, don't put too heavy a word on it, is just we don't do a good job as a culture and as a society of helping these transitions go. Disruptive transitions tend to be bloody, and they tend to be depressing, and they tend to cause a lot of a bad behavior, even as we're getting good output from it, even as we, a consumer or reader, are getting more options, more things in our hands. For the creators who came before, for the people who knew the old way, it's a very depressing, very scary time of having to learn new skills and having to evolve. That's scary. And for the new people coming in, there's often there's a lack of, I want to say, humility. There's a lack of humility that kind of comes around when suddenly you know how to use the new tools and you're able to work very efficiently in the hotness of the day, and it changes the way you kind of act and behave. It can be when you know the newest techniques. I'll explain this from a standpoint of technology. You're a developer, and when the iPhone came out, you needed iOS developers because suddenly there's this marketplace and there's the apps on the phone. Everybody needed one, and it was a very coveted position. And so those who knew those skills, which weren't that hard to learn. I mean, iOS development, a lot of fundamentals to regular software development, but there was it wasn't like you were learning a super complex language. You just aimed yourself at the hot thing of the day, which was the iPhone. You picked up those skills, and suddenly, if you were in the Bay Area, you could be pulling in 275, 350 a year because you're taking advantage of a very hot thing. And the people who took those jobs, many did so with very little humility. They were, they got the right place at the right time, and when the light of good fortune shines upon you, it's easy to let that go to your head, and it did. A lot of people went to their head. And kind of it's true with comics when you have these transitional elements. It's always surprising to me how the new guard of the day tends to look at the old guard with a lot of, not scorn, but just, there's a condescending kind of behavior that comes out. And you can usually tell, there's just, these little kind of quick adages, quick rule of thumb, not always true. But when you go to a convention or you talk to a creator and you find somebody who talks very fondly and very respectfully of the people who came before, we walk in the footsteps of giants kind of attitude, those creators are the ones that tend to last because they do have a healthy respect for the business, not a obsession, not something that's going to hold them back. They're still out trying to do their own thing, but there is a respect for the world that came before. And then there's other creators who never seem to talk about that kind of stuff, really kind of, find a lot of ways to pat themselves on the back. And those people tend to be flash in the pan people. They don't make it. And it's because it's some of it's because, of course, finding a good place in the industry where you land and you can settle and you can get along with others. That's always an important part of a job. But another part of it is just a recognition that if you got lucky and you took advantage of a transitional moment in time where the world got disrupted and things changed, that's great for you. And you should be very humble and very respectful of that moment. You also need to realize that transition is always happening. It's ever coming. And the disruption that benefited you will one day benefit someone else. One day you will be the old guy in the room. One day you will be the person who's got to learn some new skills, who is being faced with the fact that some of the things that some of your expertise is no longer useful. And that's just something you have to come to grips with in life in general. It's always true. And I think right now in comics, we're seeing a lot of this because the disruption is coming very fast and very furious. I think that a number of things happened over the last 5 to 10 years. I think comics as an industry were in a bit of an arrested development state. We had the 90s, we had the boom, and we had the bubble, and we had it pop, and we had distribution kind of cobbled together, and it wasn't good, but it was not profitable enough to replace, and it was not terrible enough that it became a crisis to replace. So it just has kind of hung on, with band-aids. And the publishers have, struggled against how to, meanwhile, at the same time, you have brick and mortar facing strong headwinds from online sales. You have price pinching going on. You have an economy that is good and bad at the same time, depending on who you're talking to and how you're looking at it. You have entertainment offerings really blow up and get disrupted. If you just go back 20 years, you were buying CDs in a store. maybe you were using Napster to steal music, but you were basically in a very physical world. And the comic movies at the time were like Catwoman and Steel, and they were not they were kind of jokes. Pop culture viewed comics as very geeky, and the geeks kind of gathered together and supported themselves. But there was no support. There was no backwind from the MCU and people wearing comic T-shirts everywhere without knowing the comics existed because the properties were so valuable and so strong. A number of disruptive things happened all at once, and it's very hard to adapt to disruption. And people haven't. I mean, the reality is people haven't done it well. It's not been easy to adapt to disruption. It never is. But in comics, you as in any industry, you need to be able to balance and manage through disruptive elements. You need to be able to adapt. And comics got hit with many different factors all at once, all over the course of the last 5 to 6 years. And I think a lot of people, including people within comics, forget about this fact. We're in a turmoil of an era that has nothing to do with the actual content inside the covers. And it's hard. It's emotionally hard for people. And people lash out, and people make the wrong decisions, and people lose faith. And there's a lot of things that happen right now. And so I didn't mean this to turn into a here's what we all got to do, because ultimately people are going to do what they want. But I think if if I can if I can ask anything of anyone, it's simply that we need to be understanding of each other. We need to recognize that the situation we're in is very fragile. It's a lot of changes happening all at once, and it's going to cause people to make strange decisions and do odd things. And we need to be a little bit understanding and a little bit supportive of each other and where it's all going. And we need to remember the basics. The basics are comics are not going away. Storytelling is not going away. It's as old as time, and it will survive. And it's our job, it's our duty to help shepherd us through it, to get us to that better place. Sorry for being so deep, so heavy. I need to do some real lightweight topics to move on from this. But sometimes you wake up, you read social media, you read kind of the opinions of creators, and it's heavy. It's tough because there's a lot of people struggling through it, and I think there are not a lot of good mentors out there. There's not a lot of good, calm, steady hand on the wheel people who are helping navigate us through this. And this is true in life. There's very few people anymore who take a burden of weight on their shoulders and help us get all through it. It's a fend for yourself society. It's a very alone society. Social media, in tying us together, has also brought us very apart. And people need help. Everyone needs help at some point, and hopefully we can help each other. Hey, thanks for listening. Sorry it got heavy. Click the bell for notification if you want to be notified when these come up, and subscribe if you wouldn't mind, and follow me on social media. Comic Perch. I'm this quiet little unknown guy who sits in the corner and nobody knows about, but you do, and thank you. Thanks for listening.